For a deeper dive into the U.S. midterms and what they could mean for Asia, we're joined by Stephen Okun, a senior advisor at McClarty Associates. He joins us from Singapore. And speaking to us from Seoul is Professor Gordon Flake, CEO of the Perth U.S.-Asia Centre at the University of Western Australia. Gentlemen, welcome both of you. Professor Flake, I'll get to you in a bit, but Steve, to come to you first about the state of play in the midterms with 8 days to go. Polling suggests that Republicans hold the edge with inflation and recession top of mind for voters.
Hey, look, that's exactly right. The question is, will this midterm election be a referendum on Joe Biden and the Democrats with a focus on mismanagement of the economy, difficulties on social issues, or is this going to be a referendum on Donald Trump and what Donald Trump has done, what the Republicans can continue to do? And so that's where this is a really interesting election, because normally you would say the Republicans should win easily, and they may end up winning relatively easy in the House. But this election has very different things. Abortion was taken away as a constitutional right. That is driving up Democratic votes and potentially bringing independent votes to the Democrats. You have candidate quality, where Donald Trump handpicked Republicans in the Senate in Georgia, New Hampshire, Nevada, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and this could cause the Republicans the chance to get the Senate. So who controls the narrative? Is it a referendum on the Democrats? Is it a choice between the Democrats and the Republicans? And depending on the answer, it is going to be very consequential for the United States as it gets ready to govern itself for the next 2 years. Who's going to run for president in 2024? And is also going to have huge implications for Asia, because this is going to have real significant foreign policy issues if the Republicans get the House and or the Senate.
Stephen, as you just alluded to, the contests are divergent as Alaska, Florida, districts of California, or Senate seats in South Dakota and Idaho. Are there specific ones which you think would be of interest or relevant to those of us here in Asia?
Well, control of the Senate is going to be very important, because if the Democrats keep the Senate, even if they lose the House, it means the Republicans won't be able to dictate what happens in terms of legislation going forward and giving President Biden a choice to veto legislation if it comes to that. So you really want to watch the key races in the Senate. And these are what we call the toss-up races. There are states that go either way, where the margin of victory in the last election was very close. So Georgia went down to the wire. Arizona went down to the wire. Pennsylvania went down to the wire. So those three races in particular, where you have incumbent Democrats running, if they can hold those seats, maybe the Democrats can then keep the Senate like they have now. The House is a national election, so the House is more dictated on what voters care about. Right now, it seems that voters are more focused on inflation and the economy and immigration and crime, issues that favor Republicans. They're not as focused on the issues that favor Democrats, like abortion and health care and gun control. So if you see voters saying they're going to vote on the economy, you can expect the Republicans to win the House. But the Senate is still about the individual candidates who run. So watch those really close Senate races.
And Professor Flake, watching the midterms from Asia, what are you looking out for? Under the Biden administration, the U.S. has sought to re-engage the region as it tussles with China for influence. Is that strategy at risk with these largely domestic elections?
It is, because it really speaks to the strength of the Biden administration, to the U.S. government as a whole. Viewers in Asia will recall that during the 4 years of the Trump administration, the U.S., which had traditionally believed that Republicans were pro-alliance, took a very different tact. Under President Trump, the U.S. retreated from its leadership in global trade and investment, pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And President Trump individually, and his party following him, was quite hostile to alliances. So after the election of 2020, when President Biden came back into office, or the Democrats rather came back into office, there was a bit of a snapback, a return to normalcy in terms of U.S. international relations, in terms of U.S. alliance relationships, in terms of U.S. foreign policy. That really is thrown into doubt if the Republican Party wins in these midterms, mainly because they inhibit the ability of the Biden administration, as Stephen mentioned, to get legislation through, and thus undermines their chances for 2024. So facing economic headwinds, facing a very difficult global environment, and if you have real continued political division over the next 2 years, that really will cause allies of the United States and Asia to have growing anxiety about the future direction of the United States post-2024. It won't be as big as an impact for the next 2 years directly. It's just a question of how countries in this region view the prospects for the United States going forward.
Right. So to your point, if a few more isolationist-leaning GOP senators manage to win seats in the midterms, what implication would this have on key alliances in the region, especially U.S.'s commitment to defending Taiwan, for example?
So ironically, the number one issue on the ballot right now isn't Taiwan. That's the one area in American politics today where there is actually bipartisan consensus. There's almost no daylight between Republicans and Democrats when it comes to China, concern about China or Taiwan. The real issue is probably something that is not directly related, but has real implications, and that's Ukraine. There's no question that the Russian President Putin has vested a lot on a Republican win in the midterms, because he's trying to split the American body politic and thus American support for Ukraine. And obviously, what happens in Asia is heavily impacted by what happens in Ukraine and the state of democracies globally. I would also kind of add to what Steve Okun said earlier on. The Republicans would very much like this to be a referendum on the Biden administration. I think globally, including allies of the United States and in the world, this is much more a choice between democracy, if you will, and the United States as a leader of a democratic system of governance, and those challenges to that. Good news out of Brazil today. But real anxiety about the trajectory of the United States, and we'll see more on the 8th of November.
Yeah, Steve, the specter of former President Donald Trump still looms large over the Republican Party despite his ongoing and numerous legal battles. Given that he failed to get re-elected and Republicans lost both houses following his presidency, how much influence does he still have, and does that resonate with midterm voters?
Well, that's what we're going to find out on November 8th, and why this election is so critical. Because Donald Trump handpicked the Senate candidates in Georgia and Ohio and Pennsylvania and New Hampshire. And if he wins, if his handpicked candidates win those 4 seats, it gives Donald Trump more power in the Republican Party than he would have otherwise. And if he comes out of this on top, it makes him a much stronger candidate going into 2024. And as Gordon said, the allies who work with the United States, like, for example, Singapore and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the partnership agreement the United States is putting forward to re-engage in Asia, that goes away under Donald Trump. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework goes away if Donald Trump is president in 2024, or if a America First president is there. And so a strong showing by the America First wing, the MAGA wing of the Republican Party in this midterms is going to give pause to those like-minded partners here in the region, saying, why should I put my neck out working with the United States like I did in the TPP and make these very difficult choices on the environment and on labor if the United States is just going to walk away 2 years from now? So this election is so important, probably the most important midterm election the United States has had from a foreign policy perspective. Presidential ones are always important, but from a foreign policy perspective, this midterm election is extremely consequential.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to pose this last question to Professor Flake, since you're based in Seoul right now. And there is speculation that North Korea could test tactical nuclear weapons before the midterms. Some experts worry that the election results may complicate denuclearization efforts of North Korea. Do you share their concerns?
Yeah, I've been watching the North Korea issue for 35 years, and I think we overstate the link between the North Korean missile and nuclear testing program and politics in the United States or elsewhere on the globe. It's primarily driven by their own technical considerations and requirements. Obviously, I think if there was a political linkage, it was a decision not to test during the People's Congress in China, so as not to irritate their primary benefactor in that regard. I don't think that North Korea's tests will be timed one way or the other as an attempt to try to influence the U.S. midterm elections. However, it could have an impact on those elections themselves, as it reminds people of how dangerous the world is. Interestingly, though, on this issue too, it's not an area of partisan divide. Like the question of China, like the question of kind of the broader contestation in the Indo-Pacific. That's not where you're seeing a dividing line between Republicans and Democrats.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. Fascinating to speak to both of you, and we look forward with anticipation for next week as well. Stephen Okun, Senior Advisor at McClarty Associates in Singapore, and Professor Gordon Flake, the CEO of the Perth US Asia Centre at the University of Western Australia.